He didn't knock, didn't call out, didn't even make it to the steps. The man fell forward in the dust like a fence post finally giving into the wind. His body hit the earth with a weight that felt older than bone. One arm sprawled out the other, clutching his chest. A torn hat rolled into the sagebrush. His breath rasped, then stilled. Miriam Lowry stood behind the screen door, her hands still covered in flour. She didn't scream. She didn't run to help. She just stared, because something about the way he fell didn't frighten her. It was the silence after the kind of silence that comes not from shock, but from recognition. She stepped out slowly. Her bare feet touched the cool plank wood of the porch. The wind picked up sharp and dry, and in it came a sound, a soft flutter like wings or paper. A folded letter had spilled from the man's coat, caught in the breeze, and now tumbled across her yard. It snagged on the fence post, flapping once, then twice before going still. Miriam moved to it without thinking, picked it up. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the texture of the paper. It was thick, worn, and the name on the outside was hers. Her name, in handwriting she hadn't seen in 5 years. No return address, no postage, just 5 words scratched in a boy's uneven scrawl. To Ma, in case I don't. Her chest tightened. Her knees gave a little. She turned back to the man in the dirt, barely breathing. And though her mind was racing, all she could whisper was, "Who are you?" The letter stayed clutched in her hand long after she had dragged the stranger inside. He hadn't woken, not fully, just groaned once when she pulled him out of the sun and onto the cot by the hearth. His shirt was soaked with old blood, and beneath the edge of his coat a bandage had long since given up. Miriam didn't unwrap it right away. She lit the lamp, put on water, watched his chest rise and fall in shallow rhythm like wind through a broken fence. Outside, the afternoon sagged into that amber stillness only the prairie knows. Inside, everything felt too quiet except for the paper still trembling in her hand. She didn't open it, not yet. Miriam Lowry had learned the hard way not to open things before she was ready. Letters, wounds, hopes. They all spilled out too fast if you weren't careful. It had been 5 years since she'd last received a letter with her name on it. 5 years since her son Caleb had written to say he'd taken work near Santa Fe, driving wagons, chasing nothing but a paycheck. She hadn't liked it. She told him so. But boys don't listen when they're sure the road owes them something. And then, silence. No more letters. No body either. Just that aching, echoing absence that leaves you guessing every night whether he died or simply forgot. People in town used to ask, used to care. But the years thinned their concern, and Miriam thinned herself with it. She stopped going to Sunday services, stopped baking extra bread, stopped leaving the porch light burning. The world had made it very clear it wouldn't send anyone back, so she stopped waiting. Until today. Now there was a man half dead on her cot and a letter in her hand with her son's handwriting on the front. She poured water into a tin basin, fetched the old bottle of whiskey from beneath the cupboard, and a scrap of clean cloth. Her hands didn't shake, but her breath caught when she leaned over him. Up close, he looked like someone who had lost every kind of fight. His face was sun-cracked, his jaw speckled with dust and dried blood. One eye was swollen. His coat smelled of horse's fire and rain that hadn't touched his skin in weeks. She pressed the cloth to his wound. He didn't flinch, just muttered something soft, broken. She leaned closer. Miriam. Her blood ran cold. No one had said her name out loud in over 2 years. Not the grocer, not the postmaster, not even the woman who used to sit beside her at the sewing circle back when she still mended things for strangers. She pulled back, hard. The man stirred again, but this time his eyes opened just barely. They were dark, not cruel, not wild, just tired. The kind of tired you can't sleep off. She looked at him the way you might look at a ghost who forgot to knock. "You know me?" she asked quietly. He tried to speak, but it came out a rasp, so he just nodded. She should have asked more. Demanded to know who he was, how he got the letter, what he meant by whispering her name. But instead, Miriam did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and brushed the hair from a man's brow. Not with tenderness, not with forgiveness, just with recognition. Because whatever this was, whatever it would turn out to be, it had already started long before he collapsed on her porch. Jesse Callahan hadn't intended to stop. He rarely intended anything anymore. For the last 6 years, he'd moved like wind through bad land, always drifting, never staying. Some men called it freedom. Jesse called it what it was, escape. He'd once ridden for the Pony Express. Fast, reliable, invisible. A boy with fast hands and no questions. Then the war came, and the roads changed. Not long after, a job gone wrong left him with a bullet too close to the bone and a debt he couldn't repay. He carried the ache of both with him, tucked under the ribs, stitched into every mile. He had no people, no land, no name worth speaking in towns with sheriffs, but he had a letter and a promise. A year ago, in a makeshift prison camp near Santa Cruz, Jesse had met a boy named Caleb Lowry, wiry, sharp, a mouth too quick for his own good. They'd bunked beside each other, shared beans jokes, regrets. But Caleb never talked about home, not until the sickness came. When it did, Jesse had expected him to beg. For medicine, for help, for mercy. But instead, Caleb pulled out a small pouch tied around his neck. Inside was a letter he'd never sent. "It's for my ma," he said, voice like ash, "in case I don't get back." Jesse remembered the way Caleb looked at him, not with trust, but with finality. "She lives near a ridge in Dakota," he said. "If you make it out, don't post it. Don't pass it off. Give it to her yourself." And then 3 days later, the fever took him. Jesse didn't run that time, didn't bury the boy, didn't even cry. He just took the letter and started walking. From New Mexico to Colorado, then Wyoming, then east. Never straight, never fast. Every detour was a delay he didn't justify. He wasn't ready, not to look her in the eye, not to hand over the last piece of someone he couldn't save. And he never opened the letter, not out of respect, but because he feared what it might say and what it wouldn't. Now, lying on the cot of a woman who hadn't spoken his name, but whose face broke something open in him, Jesse wondered if the road had ended. Maybe this was the only delivery he'd ever finish. Maybe it would be his last. When he finally woke again, it was night. The lamp was dimmed. The house was still. A fire murmured low in the stove. Miriam sat at the table, her back to him, the letter still unread in her hands. He shifted, groaned, and she turned but slowly, as if part of her had known he wouldn't die, as if disappointment would have been simpler. "You said my name," she said, not asking, not accusing. Jesse nodded. He said it often. She looked at him a long while. "Wairy, my son." Jesse tried to sit up, but the wound pulled too tight. "I shared bunk space with him a while," he said, "in the South. Before the cholera came through, he stopped, swallowed, started again. He didn't talk much, but he loved you more than anything. Wouldn't shut up about the blackberry pie you made with coffee grounds. Said it was better than any woman he'd ever kissed." Miriam blinked once, but her face didn't change. "You knew him well?" she asked. "No," Jesse said softly, "but I wish I had." She nodded once and stood. "Then you should rest." She didn't thank him, didn't ask more. Just walked past the cot and into the shadows of the back room, where Jesse could just barely make out the edge of a wooden chest, unopened, dusty, locked tight. He lay back alone in the flickering firelight, and for the first time in years, he let himself remember not the pain, not the running, but the sound of a boy's voice in the dark. "You'll get there, won't you? You'll tell her I wasn't scared." Jesse closed his eyes and whispered to no one, "I'm trying, kid. I'm trying." Miriam didn't sleep. The letter sat on the table unopened. The stranger Jesse rested in the other room, coughing quietly in the dark. And still she didn't move. Not until the sky began to lighten that pale gray before dawn, where everything feels like memory. She reached for a kitchen knife, slid it gently beneath the envelope's flap, and opened what had waited 5 long years to be read. "May, Devree, I don't know if this will ever reach you. If it does, I figure you already know I made a mess of things. I left angry, and I stayed gone out of shame. I wanted to come back better, whole, proud. I didn't get there. This camp's not meant for long stays. The sickness comes quick, and the guards don't look long when you stop moving. I've seen a man die 3 feet from a doctor holding a glass of water. That's the truth here. But there's a fella here, name's Jesse. Doesn't say much, but he listens like he's got all the time in the world. I told him about your front porch and how the wildflowers used to grow even in dry years. Told him you never gave up on people, even when you probably should have. Told him I was scared. He didn't say it, but I think he's scared too. We're all just pretending not to be. If I don't make it home, tell him thank you. He's the reason I made it this far. Tell him I forgive him for what he couldn't stop. And if you can, maybe forgive me too. Love, always, Caleb." Miriam folded the paper slowly, her fingers tracing the crease like it might vanish if she didn't hold it right. She didn't cry. Grief had carved its channels long ago. There were no tears left, just the low ache of something unfinished finally given shape. She walked back to the cot. Jesse was awake barely. His eyes tracked her. "I read it," she said. He nodded just once. "I didn't open it. Never did." "You didn't need to," she said. "You lived it." He looked away. The shame returned to his jaw, to the way his hands fidgeted under the blanket. "I should have brought him home," he said. "I should have done more." Miriam studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled something small, something worn a locket. Silver, oval, tarnished by time. She opened it and showed him the picture inside a boy with a crooked smile and a cowlick that never stayed down. Caleb, age 12. "I gave this to him the day he left," she said. "Told him it was for luck. Said if he ever needed to feel home, he just had to touch it." Jesse's face went still. Then slowly, wordlessly, he reached beneath his collar and pulled out a chain. The same locket, still warm against his chest. Miriam's breath caught. "How awhile. He gave it to me," Jesse whispered. "When he got worse. Said he couldn't wear it anymore. Told me. Maybe I'd need it more than he did." A silence fell then, not awkward, not heavy, just full. Miriam didn't ask for it back. She didn't tell him to keep it either. Some things didn't need permission. They just stayed where they were meant to. But something inside her shifted. For years she had believed Caleb was gone without a trace. Now she realized he had been carried. Not forgotten, not discarded. Carried. Even in the chest of a broken man. Even through dust and blood and silence. Miriam placed the letter on the windowsill. Let the wind curl its edges in the early morning light. Then she turned to Jesse and said, "If you're well enough by noon, the well pump's been sticking. Needs a man who knows how to loosen rust." Jesse didn't smile, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And for the first time it sounded less like obedience and more like belonging. The sky split open just after dusk. Not slowly, not with warning, just a crack across the heavens like God had snapped the world in two. Miriam was stacking firewood by the door when she heard it, the low rolling thunder that didn't echo, just pressed down like weight. Jesse had been out by the well all afternoon, sleeves rolled shoulder stiff, his hands caked in rust. She hadn't called him in. Not out of spite, just habit. Men like him usually left before the sky did anything worth watching. But he didn't leave. He came in with the wind. Boots-soaked shirt clinging to a frame still too thin, and something wild in his eyes like the thunder had stirred up ghosts he hadn't meant to bring indoors. "Storm's coming fast," he said. "I can see that," Miriam replied, wiping her palms on her apron. They said nothing more as she lit the lamps and he secured the windows. Outside, the wind howled like something lost. Inside, the silence was taut. She stirred beans over the stove. He sat in the corner chair, head bowed, cradling the locket like a charm he wasn't sure still worked. Lightning flashed once, then again, and with it a smell wet dirt and memory. Miriam set the spoon down, turned. "You said he forgave you," she said quietly, "in the letter." Jesse looked up, his face unreadable. "I read it too." A long pause. "He did," Jesse said, "but I didn't earn it." Miriam's eyes didn't soften. "You let him die." "I stayed beside him," Jesse said. "I carried his body out past the guards, past the dogs. I dug with my bare hands, gave him ground." But not a name, she snapped. "You left me thinking he vanished, that he just walked away." I was afraid. Of what? Her voice was sharp, now cutting through the thunder. Of telling a mother her son died scared, or of what she might see in your eyes when you tried to lie. Jesse stood slow. The room felt smaller. "I was afraid because I didn't try to stop it," he said. "I watched them take him. I watched them feed him nothing. I did what I could when it was already too late, and I've lived with that every damn mile since." Miriam's breath trembled. "You sound just like my husband." Jesse blinked. "He didn't come back either." She laughed, but it wasn't joy. "He came back," she said. "From the war, from the fields, but not from what it did to him. He was quiet, helpful, polite, like you." Her hands curled against her apron. "But sometimes I wondered if I was living with a ghost. He looked like my husband, slept in our bed, but his eyes never touched mine again." Jesse stared at her. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." "Good," she said, cold. "Because I don't want someone who fixes things just to hide what's broken." Another silence, another thunderclap. Jesse took a breath, and for the first time his voice shook. "I didn't come here to fix anything," he said. "I came because your son asked me to, and I stayed because something in me stopped running." Miriam looked away. I didn't ask you to stay. No, he said, but maybe you needed someone who would anyway. That did it. She turned fast, too fast, knocking the bowl of beans from the stove. It shattered against the floor, the smell of smoke and salt filling the room like a wound reopened. Get out, she whispered. Jesse didn't argue. He grabbed his coat, still damp, and walked into the storm. No saddle, no horse, just boots crunching into the dark, swallowed by rain and wind. Miriam stood alone, fists trembling, eyes dry. Outside, the mesa roared with the sound of water hitting hard earth. Inside, the room stood still, except for the letter on the sill fluttering in the draft, and the locket forgotten on the chair. The storm lasted through the night. By morning, the world had turned to ash and silence. The ground shimmered with broken puddles. The wind hung low, exhausted, as if even it had spent itself on rage. Miriam didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen chair until the oil in the lamp gave out, until the locket stopped swinging on the back of the chair, until her breath no longer fogged the window where she'd watched him disappear. She thought of her son, of the letter, of the man who carried it farther than most would carry blood. She didn't cry, not until she realized something else was missing. Willa, she called. The name echoed, once, then nothing. Willa louder now, sharp, fear rising. No answer. No sound from the back room. No tiny boots by the hearth. No shawl hanging by the hook. Miriam ran outside, barefoot skirts clinging wet to her calves. The storm had erased every trail. The yard was mud, the fence torn down in one corner. She scanned the horizon and spotted it, the faintest trail of small prints heading east, toward the ravine. She didn't pause, didn't think. She just ran. Branches whipped her arms. Stones tore her feet. The wind picked up again, cold and fresh, stinging her lungs. She followed the prints until they blurred, smudged into nothing. At the edge of the ravine, she slipped, fell to her knees. Willa, nothing, only the wind answering back. Then, shuri, idriya one. Hooves. A rider burst through the mist, wet, muddied, wild-eyed. Jesse. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He slid from the saddle and grabbed Miriam by the shoulders. Where did she go? I don't know. I thought she was inside. I didn't check. I thought she was asleep. His eyes scanned the land fast, focused. She was sitting by the stove when I left, he murmured. She always hums when she's scared. Miriam clutched his arm. You can't see anything in this fog. Jesse, it's too late. He looked at her, eyes fierce. You think I came back just to watch her vanish? And then he was gone again, back on the horse, charging into the ravine, into the low-lying mist like a man chasing something more than a child. He was chasing his redemption. 15 minutes passed, maybe an hour. Miriam didn't know. She sat in the mud, frozen. Then a shadow. He returned stumbling, on foot, carrying her daughter in his arms. She was limp, wrapped in his coat, her lips blue, her lashes dusted in frost. But her chest rose once, then again. She's breathing, he rasped. Miriam ran, took the girl from him, held her so tight her arms shook. She's cold, but she's here. She's here. Oh, God, Jesse, she's here. Then she looked back. Jesse had dropped to his knees. Blood from his shoulder soaked through the old bandage. His hands trembled from cold and exertion. His breath came ragged. He looked up once, only once, and then collapsed face first into the snow. She got them both back to the house. She didn't remember how, only that she moved like time had no choice but to wait. She placed Willa beside the fire, wrapped her in every dry blanket they had fed her warm broth, until she stirred, until she mumbled "Mama" in a voice barely there. Miriam kissed her cheeks until the color returned. Then she turned to Jesse. His wound was worse, split open from the ride, infection burning under the surface, fever high. She boiled herbs, crushed garlic, whispered the old prayers her mother used to say in Cherokee under her breath. For 3 days he drifted in and out, murmuring things in sleep, apologies, names, songs. She never left the room. And when he finally woke, eyes clear, voice hoarse, the first thing he saw was Miriam sitting beside him, darning the hem of Willa's shawl with her fingers. He tried to speak. She raised a hand. Easy, she said. You're not done healing. He swallowed, managed a rasp. You came back for me. She didn't look up, just kept stitching. No, she said softly. You came back for us. And then... So this time, I stayed. The fever broke just before dawn on the 4th day. Jesse woke in pieces, light first, then pain, then the slow warmth of something soft pressed to his skin. It took a while before he realized it was a child's hand tucked gently against his ribs. Willa, asleep, breathing steady. He turned his head, neck stiff. Miriam sat nearby, her back to him, stirring something in a pot. Sunlight touched the edge of her shoulder. She hadn't undone her braid in days. He tried to speak, but his throat cracked. She heard it anyway. Without turning, she said, "You're late." He blinked. "For what?" "For staying," she replied, almost too quiet to catch. Then she stood, filled a tin cup, and brought it to him. "Slow," she said, tipping it to his lips. The water was warm, clean. He drank, coughed, drank again. When she pulled it back, their eyes met. No bitterness, no gratitude, just calm. "You lost a lot of blood," she said, "and the old wound's open again. Might leave a scar uglier than the first." He tried to smile. It came out more like a twitch. "Don't much plan on impressing anybody." Miriam nodded. "Good." And then she turned and went back to the stove. That was how it began. He didn't ask to stay. She didn't ask him to leave. Each morning he tried to do a little more sweeping the porch, checking the fence line, hammering loose planks where the wind had torn through. Each night he sat by the fire with Willa curled in his lap, her head tucked under his chin, her breathing slow and easy. Miriam rarely spoke at first, but she watched. When he patched the roof without being told, when he fixed the door latch, when he picked wild onions and laid them on the counter without a word. She noticed when he didn't ask what needed doing, he just did it. One afternoon, as he sanded a broken chair on the porch, Miriam came out with a cup of tea, placed it beside him on the railing, sat down on the opposite bench. They didn't speak, not for a long time. Only when the sun dipped behind the distant ridge did she say, "My husband died in silence, not from wounds, but from weight." Jesse didn't move. "I know the kind," he said. She turned to him. "So do I," she answered. And that was the first thread. Thin, quiet, but strong enough to hold. Later that week, Willa found an old doll under the floorboards. One Jesse had whittled from scrap and left unfinished. "Can you make her a chair?" she asked, holding up the figure with big, hopeful eyes. Jesse blinked. "I can try." That night by lamplight, he carved, slowly, carefully, hands steady for the first time in months. Miriam sat across from him, sewing patches into Willa's only winter coat. The fire popped softly. Rain ticked on the roof in rhythm with the knife on wood. At one point, Jesse looked up. Miriam met his gaze. Neither of them looked away. When he finished, the chair was plain but strong. The doll sat upright, perfectly balanced. Willa beamed. Miriam said nothing, but that night she placed a folded blanket beside his cot in the loft, lined with fleece and stitched with her late husband's initials. It wasn't permission, it wasn't an apology. It was something better. It was room. One morning, Jesse woke to the sound of chickens. Real ones. Miriam had traded for them in town. He heard her humming by the well, her voice carrying through the open window. He stepped outside, the wind catching the edges of his shirt. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth. Not dust, not gravel. Soil. Soft, fertile, waiting. He turned toward the field beyond the ridge. And for the first time since he'd buried a boy beside a dry riverbed, he wondered what might grow if a man simply stayed. Sunum. Spring came late that year. The frost lingered longer than usual, clinging to fence posts like it didn't trust the thaw. But when it finally broke, it did so all at once, wildflowers blooming, where weeks before there had only been dust and regret. The field behind Miriam's house turned green, then gold. Willa ran barefoot through rows of new corn, her laughter skipping across the air like stones over water. And Jesse stayed. He built a new chicken coop, replaced the broken windows with panes he'd cut by hand, fixed the old windmill so it hummed again, low and steady like the breath of something long asleep now stirring. He never asked for a room, just kept sleeping up in the loft under the beam that creaked when the wind turned west. Miriam never offered one either. But sometimes late in the evening, when the porch light flickered and Willa had fallen asleep with a book across her chest, she'd sit beside him on the steps. They wouldn't talk. They didn't need to. Because some silences grow softer with time. One morning, Willa brought Jesse a box. Inside was the locket. "I think it's yours now," she said. He hesitated, fingers brushing the silver. "I only kept it safe," he told her. "It was never mine." Willa shrugged in that way only children do, like the past was already decided and forgiveness had no expiration date. "Mama said you planted more than corn," she said. "I think she means you." Jesse laughed, a short, surprised sound that cracked something open in his chest. He closed the box, nodded. "I'll keep it close." Later that afternoon, Miriam joined him in the garden. She knelt beside him in the soil, her hands finding weeds before her eyes did. Her hair was loose now, grayer, softer somehow. They worked side by side in the light that turned everything golden. After a while, she spoke, not looking up. "I used to think Caleb's letters were all I had left of him." Jesse wiped sweat from his brow. "They still are," he said. "But they led me here. She paused. Maybe some letters aren't meant to be read. Maybe they're meant to be lived. He looked at her then, not with longing, not with grief, with something steadier. I'll never be him, he said. Your boy, your husband. I know. I don't want to be. She finally met his gaze. You're not, she said, but you stayed. That night they ate by the fire. Willa told a story about her doll learning how to ride a goat. They laughed until they cried. Then Jesse stepped outside and looked up. The sky was wide open, clear, endless waiting. He didn't think of running, didn't think of ghosts. He just listened to the windmill, to the chickens settling down, to the sound of something inside him finally letting go. He reached into his vest, pulled out the folded letter he still carried, creased faded, and buried it beneath the cottonwood tree, not out of forgetting, but as a seed. Some say the West was built on bullets and blood, but not here. Here it was built on silence, on stillness, on the hands of those who stayed. And maybe on the kind of love that doesn't need a name, only time and dirt and a reason to grow again. Perhaps tonight the sky no longer watches. Perhaps they're waiting for someone to close it. If you've ever waited for someone who never came back, or forgave someone who almost did, maybe you know what it means to stay. Here on Still Winds of the West, we remember those who never left. Subscribe. Sit with us a while, the fire's still warm.